Hey guys, welcome back to the Brown Paper Theology podcast. I'm Will, and as ever, it is the mission of this podcast to inspire people to get into the foundational texts of our faith, to hear what God is still saying through them. And to do that, today we're going to be back in the story of the Bible series, guys and gals. Now, I hope you're enjoying it so far and learning along with us. This week, we're going to close out the opening movement of the whole biblical story. So this episode marks the end of Genesis 1 through 11. And we're going to take everything we learned in these first 11 chapters with us as we continue on in the story. So just by way of resourcing you, the late Dr. Michael Heiser wrote an amazing book on what we're going to discuss in this class called The Unseen Realm, and I cannot recommend it enough because he goes into so much more detail and fleshes out the thoughts presented here. So if you are interested in learning more, I recommend that book to no end, times a million. So please check it out if you want to. All right, that's all I have for now, so may God bless you, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Guys, welcome back. It's good to see you, truly. Welcome back. This is awesome. Again, every week this is super exciting for me because this stuff lives in my head for so long that it's good to get it out. It's good to see if interpretations make sense. And also it's just a pleasure to be with you guys. So seriously, thank you. As always, before we get too far, let's just open up with a word of prayer. That way we can just do this adequately with the right frame of mind and just honor and glorify the Lord. So, Jesus, we thank you so much for today. It is truly, truly a gift, Lord, to be able to do this with this amazing group of people. God, to be able to open your word and to study it and to delight in it, to meditate on it, as Psalm 1 says. And so again, God, as we go into it, I pray that you would just cheer us on, that you would just show us and reveal to us things that you want seen. And I pray, as always, God, this wouldn't just be my words that are said, but it's going to be you speaking through me so that we can honor and glorify you above all. So we thank you, Jesus. We praise you. We just ask this all in your holy, precious, and powerful name. In the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, guys. So today we are going to be tackling Genesis chapters 10 and 11. And these are going to kind of close out the opening movement of Genesis itself. And so Genesis is divided really into two pieces. It's chapters 1 through 11 and then 12 through 50. 1 through 11 is like the primeval history, and then 12 through 50 is called the patriarchal history. That's when we get into the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's kind of when like the narrative of the Bible really sort of takes off. We're spanning like centuries in the first couple chapters, the first 11 chapters, and then as soon as chapter 12 starts, it's like it slows way down, which is cool. But chapters 1 through 11 are super important, super vital, as we've been saying, that they set the template, the building blocks for the rest of the biblical story going forward, to where we're going to see repeated language, repeated thoughts, and to sort of understand, like if we get chapters 1 through 11 really into our minds and really understand them, understand what's going on, it's going to help us interpret the rest of the story moving forward. So even though we've done it a million times, if we've done it once, we've done it a million times, let's just do a quick summary of where we are up to this point, and then we're going to go into this final little movement, and then we'll finish the first 11 chapters, which is a huge achievement. All right, so I don't know if you guys had a chance to listen to it last time, but the first 11 chapters go through the same cycle 2 times. And that cycle is chaos to order to garden to failure. And then it's like failure a second time. Usually it's the second generation or the next generation. And so second failure. And then it's kind of it leads to the splitting, and then it always leads to this this city at the end. And so for the first movement of that, we see Genesis 2 begins with this idea of there's too much land, there's not enough water. It's this dry, dusty wilderness. It's this image. It's a different image of chaos than Genesis 1 presents, but it's still chaos. And so what God does is he sets about to solve the issues that are there. So there's no plants, there's no human, and so systematically he solves those issues. He plants a garden, and then he makes the human, rests the human in the garden, and it's a beautiful setup. And then we get the whole, the image of it's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make an Azer for him. And so the human is put into this deep sleep. God provides the delivering ally, the delivering help in the form of a woman. And so then you get male and female together in the garden space, living in harmony with the animals, and it's a great setup. It's exactly what God intends for humanity itself, because remember, Genesis 1 presents the whole picture. It's supposed to be this total overlap of heaven and earth, where heaven and earth are completely one and totally unified. And then Genesis 2 presents that as just a localized space, localized to the garden, with the implication that through the work of these humans partnering with God, that the garden would then spread. So that's kind of the intention. But that story kind of just like goes way off the rails, because when chaos presents itself to these humans, rather than ruling over it, which is what humanity is called to do, they allow chaos to rule over them. They channel chaos into the garden, and because of that, they're cast out. And the whole story, the whole intention that God has, it goes off the rails. And so the whole biblical story is, how are we going to get back to that point? How are we going to get back to the garden? How are we going to get back to the garden? How are we going to have real humans in the garden doing what humans are designed and here for? So they get cast out of the garden. And then into the land of Eden, we get the story of their first two sons, Cain and Abel. And Cain replicates the decision of his parents. Instead of taking the fruit, taking the fruit, he takes the life of his brother. And so it's that second failure which causes a splitting of the family. And then it all winds up with Cain moving out of the land of Eden entirely and building a city. And so that's the first kind of cycle. It's the first cycle. And then from this city, we see that it's a picture of advancement. So there's really good things that are happening, like animal husbandry and metallurgy and music. And so it's all these beautiful things that come out of a city. But at the same time, all that good stuff is happening while violence inside the city just rises like crazy. And so we get the story of Lamech, who's this violent dude with two wives who's singing about the fact that he killed a dude for just like slapping him. And so violence is just going off the roof. It's going crazy. And that's kind of the story of everything that's happening in the world at the time also. So as humanity is increasing on the face of the earth, violence is also increasing. And there's this spiritual rebellion where the sons of God are taking human women, and they have this offspring, the Nephilim, who are spreading violence themselves. And all of this stuff is just headed toward destruction. It's headed toward death and disorder and just brokenness. And God sees that, and he laments over the fact he has this intense, deep, sad feeling, and he regrets that he made humanity on the face of the earth because of what they're doing to his good world. And so he says, the end of all flesh has come up before me. I can see the end of the road, and it's leading toward destruction. And so he takes that, he says, I'm going to accelerate that process, but I'm going to use it to then bring about new creation. And so that's when we start back over. So the flood itself is both God's judgment upon this broken humanity, but it's also a mercy in the sense that he puts the created order back into a chaotic state, but he allows this one dude, Noah, and his family to kind of like, they're like the seed of the new humanity. It's a new Adam, it's a new Eve. It's this new humanity that's preserved in this Eden boat. And so the whole story of the flood is all about how the cosmic structure is comes crashing back down. The waters above and below, they meet again. The dry land is destroyed. Life is destroyed, but then systematically we see God does this recreative thing. He sends a wind, the waters subside, the dry ground appears, humanity and animals get off the boat, and it's like we're right back to this point again, where it's order. And then we see Noah plant a garden, which is awesome, but then he has his own failure in the garden. And then we see his son make this really weird, awful decision to try to usurp his father's role by having sex with his own mom, which is gross. And then from that, we get this child named Canaan. And so chapter 9 of Genesis ends with this three-part, it's a blessing to two brothers and then a curse on one descendant. And so chapter 9 ends this way. It says, "Cursed be and this is Noah speaking, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. And he also said, Blessed be the Lord, or blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japhet, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." Then it says, "After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and then he died." Okay, so we have, up to this point, we've gone through the cycle one time. So we started with the garden, ended with Cain's city, and then we go through the cycle again where we start with the flood, and then the garden failure and the second failure all happen it's like 2 verses. It's super quick, super fast. And so we should expect that the next part of the story that we're going to meet is the city part. That's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to see the city and the Tower of Babel. But before we get there, chapter 10 is everybody's favorite part of the Bible, a massive genealogy. Who doesn't love a good genealogy? And so we have these 3 sons. We have Shem, Ham, and Japhet. And what the author's going to do is then just list all of the descendants of these people, of these 3 children. And then these descendants become like the nations of the earth. And so I have this little handout for you guys. So as we read these very exciting names, you can kind of see what's going on with this. And so, yeah. And so it's really important to remember that this is the world in the biblical author's imagination, in their mind, in their understanding, okay? This is the world. So let's just remember that as very important moving forward and in all our interpretations of the text up to this point, that this is their understanding of what the world is, okay?
Their names on it, though, is it just like that was their territory?
Yeah, so we'll get there with what's going on here. Yeah. So I know it's going to be boring to read a bunch of names, but this is super important. This is in God's inspired text for a reason. This is super important to Israelites themselves to understand where these people are coming from, who these people are, and all of their relations to one another. Because this sort of 3-part blessing, it sets the tone for how these brothers are going to interact with each other. And it's these brothers in terms of like these nations. And so we're going to see that later on, Abraham, who Israel comes out of, he's a descendant of Shem. And then the Canaanites are descendants of Ham. And so remember, Shem and Ham, it says, "Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." And so there's this conflict between Shem and Ham that Noah kind of pronounces. And then we see that kind of manifest later on in the story when in Joshua and Judges and all this stuff. But for now, let's just read all these super fascinating names, and then we'll get into the Tower of Babel. But it's important that we get these names first. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to pronounce them. Feel free to laugh along with me with the way they sound. All right, so these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Sons were born to them after the flood. Okay, the sons of Japhet. We're going to go Japhet first. He has Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yavin, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. And then what the narrator does is he takes one of those and then traces his descendants after that. So he doesn't trace all of the descendants. And so that's intentional for the biblical authors, that if they traced all of the descendants of all these people, this thing would be way longer than it actually is. And so there's some intentionality with who's traced. And then what's really important is how many descendants we get at the end of this, okay? So you don't have to keep count, don't worry, but the number that we get at the end is very significant. Okay, the sons of Gomer are Ashkenaz, Riphtha, and Tegorma, the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language by their clans in their nations. Okay, the sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The sons of Ra'amah, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod, okay? He was the first on earth to be a mighty man, a Gibborim, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. You guys say that, right? No. Okay, we should. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he then went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, and that is the great city. Egypt fathered Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, and Calsuhim. Oh yeah, also that's from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. All right, good. You guys remembered all those? Perfect. Okay. Sweet. All right. So Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the clans of the Canaanites dispersed, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. To Shem also, the father of the children of Eber, the oldest brother of Japhet, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Now Arphaxad, he fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Yoktan. Yoktan fathered Almodad, Sheleph, Hazar, Maveth, Jira, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Yoktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah according to their genealogies in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the whole earth after the flood. Okay, so we have all of these children that are descendants of Noah's sons, and the grand total, we are given 70 nations, okay? 70 nations. So it's 7 times 10. So 7 is the number of completion. 10 is the number of, it's the words that God speaks 10 times in Genesis 1. And so this language of 70, it's a symbolic number of completion. So 70 are listed and named. But there are more than 70 that we see because it says, like, for instance, Japhet, it says, from these the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language by their clans in their nations. And so the biblical authors are aware of more than 70 nations, but it's significant that there's 70 listed here. And so 70 is this number of totality. It's their understanding of the world, of the table of nations, and like this is super core going into the rest of the story. And so when we get to the Tower of Babel, we're going to see what happens there, and then how in the New Testament that's actually that's reversed, and it's all about this sort of nations thing, especially with Paul's missionary goal. He really passionately cares about this table of nations thing. All right, so if you guys notice, after these nations are listed, there's usually this little like ending note with each with his own language by their clans in their nations. These are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah according to their genealogies and their nations. From all these nations spread about on the earth after the flood. And a verse prior, these are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. Okay, so there's this huge emphasis on each clan has its own language, each clan has its own nation, and each clan has its own land. And so that's important. That's important that these 70 nations are chosen and listed. And like we said, as we go on to the biblical story, when we see certain nations in conflict with one another, we have to go back to this little blessing/curse that Noah gives and try to understand what hat is this nation wearing right now? Are they wearing the Ham hat? And is this a Ham versus Shem thing? Is this a Shem versus Japhet thing? Is this a Japhet versus Ham thing? And then try to interpret what that means in terms of the blessing/curse thing. It's also good to remember that when certain biblical characters don't act like their progenitor, their hat person, that's significant also. So like when a Canaanite doesn't act like a Canaanite, that should be a surprising thing to us. Where it's like, oh, that's really cool, that's really awesome. Because Canaanites are usually cast as this specific way, as acting like Ham, and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Was that thrilling and exciting? I know it was. I know it was. All right, so yeah, we have these 70 nations. Okay, but we really need to know, how the heck did one family become 70 nations? What happened for them to kind of spread like this? And so Genesis 11 acts almost as like a, so we give this, so Genesis 10 is this whole listing of all these nations, and then Genesis 11 is kind of like a flashback to a moment that's somewhere in the middle here, that's something that happened to then this dispersion things happened and all these languages came about. And so what I want you to remember, as we go back with that mention of Nimrod, okay, so chapter 10, verse 9, and chapter 10, verse 8, Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man, a Gibborim. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Now, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and that's in the land of Shinar. And then later, we see his second empire, as an empire builder, he builds Assyria. Now, Babylon and Assyria, later on in the biblical story, massive problems in the story of Israel. And so we're going to see later on that Israel finally makes it to the promised land. They promise that they're going to be faithful to Yahweh. Now, if they're not faithful to Yahweh, one of the consequences of that was to be taken over and to be exiled. And that happens to the whole kingdom. First, Assyria sweeps in and takes away the 10 northern tribes. And then Babylon comes in and overtakes Assyria. And then Babylon comes in and overtakes Judah. And so these two empires, Babylon and Assyria, they're both not good. They're both going to cause extreme problems later on in the story. And this dude, Nimrod, he began both of them. And remember, he's the son of Ham, okay? So the Ham line is usually not cast in the best light because of Canaan itself. But Nimrod is a mighty hunter before the Lord. Nimrod, the name Nimrod loosely translates to "we will rebel." Not a great name to have. So Nimrod, we will rebel. And it makes sense because he is he's a mighty man. He's a Gibborim. And so the Gibborim, Gibborim, sorry, I know there's going to be a lot of, it's this mighty hunter or mighty warrior. This is the same language that describes the Nephilim, okay? So Nimrod is like this Nephilim giant dude named We Will Rebel, and he is the progenitor of two of the most brutal and awful empires that we meet in the biblical story. Okay, so this is a bad dude, Nimrod. We will rebel. So Nimrod begins these two nations. So Nimrod begins Babel, which is Babylon. And Assyria. Now, the capital city of Assyria is Nineveh. What is the story that focuses on Nineveh later on in the Bible? You guys know this? This is biblical trivia. So Nineveh is the featured city in a small book of the Bible. It's 4 chapters. Usually we just focus on the first 3. There's a big fish.
Jonah.
There you go, Jonah. Yeah, so Jonah. So Jonah, so Nineveh is like the city that Jonah is tasked with going to. And so Nineveh represents like God's prophet going to his like mortal enemy. But God is he even wants to bless Nineveh. He like doesn't want to destroy it right away, so he sends his prophet there. So it's this cool little story of God's ultimate plan is still to bless all the nations of the earth, even though he chooses one. And then you get the story of Jonah not wanting to do it, and it's good. But the story of Jonah is super important because with it, he's tasked with going to Nineveh, but he goes the farthest away from it he possibly can, to Tarshish. So Tarshish is the farthest west nation that's listed, and so he goes in the polar opposite direction of where he was supposed to go. And so that's cool, that's important. That's when the Table of Nations actually comes in handy.
Where is that?
So he's tasked with going to Nineveh, which is to the, where is it, to the east? North? East? It's, yeah. So Nineveh is the capital city of Assyria. Let's see on this map here.
In between Kala and Rez.
Yeah, he's supposed to go east, but he goes as far west as he possibly can.
Yeah.
So that's where he goes. He's tasked with going somewhere, and he does not want to go there at all. Okay, all right. So we have Nimrod, who's this mighty hunter. He starts these two empires, and we're going to see the founding of this one in Genesis 11. That's what Genesis 11 focuses on, is what happens at Babel. That's what Genesis 11 is all about. And it makes all the sense in the world because we're at this point in the story. Okay, we've experienced the double failure of Noah and his son, and so we should expect the splitting of the family, which is what we just described, all of these nations splitting apart from these brothers, all resulting in this building of a city, or culminating in the building of a city. And so chapter 11 opens this way, and it sounds in contrast to what we just read. So now the whole earth had one language and one lip, the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Now remember, Shinar is where the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, in the land of Shinar. So Shinar is where Babel is. It's where Babylon is. And the people said to one another, you know what? Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And so they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar, or tar for mortar. Now, usually the building, they would just do it like stones and mortar. And so that's really slow because you have to figure out, how can I fit this stone in like this hole? It's all irregular. It takes a lot of extra work. But bricks are all uniform, and it's much easier to build with. Okay, so brick and tar. This is like architectural advancement, which again, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Architectural advancement isn't a bad thing, but it's framed in this story that we're going to see. It's not framed in a good way. Okay, all right, so come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Okay, so here's their intention. Chapter 11 opens up with all the people. They are moving. They're sticking together. Migrating from the east, and they go to Shinar. Okay, so there's a couple problems. There's a couple things that are here that don't seem like issues unless we remember earlier words from God earlier on in the story. Because what is God's ultimate plan for humanity? What does he tell them to do in Genesis 1? It says, be fruitful and multiply, then what? It's okay. Yeah. Fill the earth. Fill the earth and subdue it. So spread. Don't stick together. Spread out. But what this group of people is doing is they're huddling together and they're all moving together. Which, I mean, we can understand. It makes sense, like strength in numbers. You don't really want to split up. But remember, God's whole intention is that people will spread out along the land.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Does your Bible say Shinar? Mine says Babylonia.
Okay, that's cool. That's good. So
it does have a little like asterisk thing next to it.
yeah. So Shinar and Babylon are the same place.
Okay.
Yeah, Babylonia. Yeah, so Shinar, Babylon, same place. Yeah, that's an important distinction to make. Yeah. Yeah, and that's going to be important when we get to Joshua chapter 7, because there's a story of this dude who's taking a cloak from Shinar. And we're supposed to remember, well, what's Shinar again? Oh yeah, Shinar is Babylon. Babylon's not a good image, and so this person is making a terrible decision by doing that. And so we have this group of people. They're moving all together, and then they have this plan. They say, you know what? We're going to build ourselves a city and a tower with its head in the skies. And let us make a name for ourselves. And remember, lest we be dispersed over the whole face of the earth. So remember, they don't want to be dispersed. They want to stick together. They want to make a great name for themselves. They want to build a tower with its head in the skies. And so they're going to build this ziggurat structure with its head in the skies. And so what are they trying to do here? By building something to go up to the skies, its head in the skies, what are they trying to get to, or what are they trying to sort of unite on their own terms? Heaven and earth. Okay, awesome. So they're trying to make a space that is both heaven and earth. But remember, what is the motivation behind this? It's not just, hey, let's just build a tower with its head in the skies. There you go. It's let us build a tower with its head in the skies and let us make a name for ourselves. And so it's this motivation of arrogance and selfishness. We're going to make our name great. It's all about us, us, us. And so this tower is them, or there, uniting heaven and earth. On their own terms. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but we actually had a story that was exactly like this, with sort of a little bit of a role reversal back in Genesis 6. How does Genesis 6 begin again? Who's looking down and seeing these beautiful human women and taking them for themselves? Do you guys remember? Well, so the Nephilim come from the union, but it's these sons of God who are looking down, and they are uniting heaven and earth on their own terms. But it's like the opposite direction. It's like the spiritual rebellion is trying to unite heaven and earth from like the heaven direction, and Babylon's trying to unite heaven and earth from the earthly direction. But it's the same thing. It's just it's a different direction. And remember, the language in Genesis 6 is all framed in the same language as what's happening in the garden at the tree. It's the sons of God saw that human women were good. They were beautiful, attractive. They were tov. So they saw good and they took. Just like the humans at the tree saw what was good in their own eyes, they took the fruit and they ate it. And so even though that particular language isn't necessarily there, it's still a parallel story, so we can say that, okay, this is another failure narrative. It's another fail. And so this is like the fall part 3. We had the fall part 1, which was in the garden. We had the fall part 2, which was before the flood. And this is like the fall part 3. And after this, we're gonna look at all 3 of those and see what problem arises from those, and then there's 3 problems, 3 separate issues that are all related and tangled, and then those kind of drive the plot forward of who's going to solve these problems. But before we get there, let's continue on the story. Okay, so this tower is a union of heaven and earth on their own terms. It's this sort of mountain structure that they're building for their own name, and they want to stick together, and they want to, it's like arrogance. It's arrogance. Okay, and they don't want to be dispersed over the whole face of the earth. Now, the next verse is one of my favorites in the whole Bible. And so, heaven and earth on their own terms, name for themselves. Okay. And all of this, guys, all of this is arrogance. And so Babel later on in the story is the symbol of arrogance. It's humanity turned in upon itself to make our name great. We are so cool. We did all this. This is all from us. We made ourselves great. Like all that is self-focused, self-centered, and it's destructive. Okay, so Babel becomes the symbol of arrogance, or Babylon becomes the symbol of arrogance.
Hey, Will.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to point out that you're talking about how the technological advancement.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when they said the common speech, I feel like they're trying to make a reference to the written, another advancement that we made, which is the uniform text. And it was the first, like, written text to people. And it was created in Babylon.
I got you.
To allow trade, to create more of a centralized, language.
I got you. Yeah.
So I wonder if that's what they're pointing out.
Very well. Yeah, could be. I think the unity, it's not necessarily, like, unity isn't necessarily a problem per se, because later on in, like, the New Testament, unity is everything. Like, unity is everything. But it's, what is this unity serving? And so the unity in this case is serving an ultimately self-centered focus, where it's like we are uniting so that we can make ourselves great. Whereas in the New Testament, it's we are uniting because we are upholding and uplifting Jesus, who is great, on our behalf. We're entering into his body. So it very well could be what you're saying, for sure. But I think just the unity language here is this unity good or is it bad? And it's ultimately bad because of what they're doing with the unity. Gotcha. That totally could have been with the language, for sure. So in chapter 5, verse 5, remember, they're trying to build a tower that reaches to the heavens, that reaches into God's space, okay? And they think it's pretty high. They think it's high enough. But what does verse 5 say? And then the Lord came down to see the city and the tower from the children of man had built. And so they think they're getting up there. They think they're up in the heavens. They think so, but then God still has to come down. It's like, you weren't quite high enough. And so God is he's still seated and throned above. He's in the heavens of the heavens. They're never going to be able to reach him, and that's kind of the point. This is their own strength. They're trying to unite heaven and earth on their own terms, and it's not going to work. And so the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they're one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they'll do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. That's powerful, guys. This unified humanity, nothing is going to be impossible for them. But remember, it's like a twisted, like unity is good and it's powerful and it's amazing, but what purpose is it serving? That's the issue. It's that this unified people are trying to build a city for their own name, to make their own name great. And remember, back in the original building of a city, Cain built his city because he didn't trust God's own protection for him. And so cities represent this, like, I can't trust God. I have to do this stuff on my own terms. And so Cain's city is being, like, magnified and increased here, where the city of Babylon, it's Cain's city to the max, where it's, we're not going to trust God. We've got ourselves. We're going to unite heaven and earth on our own terms. We've got this, God. Thank you. We're going to do it. We don't need you. We can do this on our own. But God still has to come down. He still comes down to them. And because of this destructive unity, he says, come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. And so this building project, which is ultimately destructive, he confuses their language so it comes to a halt. And then it says, so the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth. And they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord balaled the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. And so at Babel, it's this destructive unity because it's ultimately self-serving. And the very thing they feared is the very thing that God hands them over to. They were so terrified of being dispersed over the face of the earth that they said, nope, we're going to stick together. We're all going to move in one place. We're going to live in one way. We're going to build this one city, this unified city that is specifically for the purpose of making our own name great. And God says, nope, you're going to spread. And so God wants humanity to spread. And so what ends up happening to this humanity is they spread. And it's God's sort of like judgment on them. And so what's interesting is that all of the stories in Genesis especially, they follow this sort of cyclical pattern of after the city, there's chaos, and there's order. It's a decreation and a recreation. And so the Tower of Babel, God's judgment on it, acts almost as another form of that, where he confuses their language. So they're thrown back in chaos again. But remember, God always can draw life out of chaos. That's his ultimate plan. That's his ultimate purpose. And that's exactly what, bless you, that's exactly what we see. So after the story of Babel, bless you, we have the story of this dude, or the genealogy of this dude Shem. We trace another genealogy. Who doesn't love a good genealogy? But we're getting down, we're tracing this genealogy to the specific family of Terah. Now this dude named Terah, when he was 70, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. Now the name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, and she had no child. So Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Okay, and then we get chapter 12, which is amazing. Like we said, chapter 11 is the end of the first section of Genesis, and then chapter 12 begins the story of Abraham and all that cool stuff. But from the scattering of Babylon, from God throwing this people into chaos and confusion, what he does is he then plucks, like we're going to see, he's plucking one person from this scattering. He's going to pluck this dude named Abram, and then he's going to work through this guy to then achieve his ultimately his good purpose. And so the decreation of Babel is met with like the recreation of this guy Abram, to where he's now going to be God's God's chosen one, his conduit to bring blessings to all the nations of the earth. Okay, so, but before we get there, let's just go back to Babel. Babel is this representative of selfish arrogance. It's unity on a destructive level. And on the opening pages of Exodus, I know we're going all over the place, but opening pages of Exodus, we see Egypt is described with the same language that Babylon is described as. So we're supposed to think, okay, this is like a new Babylon. Okay, so in chapter 1, we have, so in chapter 1, we'll start with verse 13. This is Exodus chapter 1, verse 13. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and in brick and all the kinds of work in the field. And their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. And so even just that little tiny detail of Egypt being built of the same things that Babylon's being built out of, the Tower of Babel, we're supposed to think of Egypt as this new symbol of arrogance, of ultimately self-centered, self-focused, self-aggrandizement. So like Egypt becomes the new Babylon. And so Babylon it's a real place, but it takes on this like cosmic symbolic meaning later on when we go into the story. And I think a lot of that does come from the fact of like Babylon is the big bad nation that was like God's judgment on Israel. And so there's all this emphasis on Babylon in the story so we can kind of understand why it's depicted that way. What's this symbol mean? And even in the Revelation, when we see Babylon appear again, it's this symbol of a nation that's so turned inward on itself that it's trying to make its own name great to serve its own purpose. Okay, so that's chapter 11. But like I said before, chapter 11, we have another issue that arises from this, but it's not actually talked about until we get to Deuteronomy 32. And so let's just go over the 1 through 11 saga real quick. All right, so we have the fall or the failure happened in 3 parts, okay? We have Genesis 3, Genesis 6, and Genesis 11. All right, these are the three failure narratives in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, okay? And they're the three failure narratives because of the language that's used to describe them. And so Genesis 3 and 6 uses the same language, but then 6 and 11 are paralleled together. And so it's like this thing, it's like repetition, but there's variation. It's the same core thing that's happening, but it's manifesting in three different ways. And there's actually three different conflicts or three different issues that arise from each of the failure narratives. Okay, so Genesis 3 is all about the humans versus what? So they're in the garden. It's wonderful.
The trees.
Okay, the tree. Okay, who is it?
Snake.
Exactly, the snake. The serpent. Okay, so Genesis 3 is all about the serpent versus humanity. So it's a joint rebellion of humanity and the serpent. They're rebelling at the same time, trying to usurp something that God is giving to humanity, but also the humans failing to actually be human and giving their authority to the serpenty character. And so Genesis 3 has the conflict of the serpent itself. So that's the conflict that arises there. So Genesis 6 is where it gets a little weird. It's weird. This is all weird. But Genesis 6 is, for some reason, more difficult for us to wrap our heads around because it's odd. And then Genesis 11 is going to be equally difficult to wrap our heads around, I think. So Genesis 6, remember, it begins with this weird, the first 4 verses are really odd. It's really strange. It begins this way. When man...
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Something just fell on my head. All right. Okay. All right. So when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were tov, attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my flesh shall not abide in this man forever, for he is also flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Now the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And you know what? Also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of man and bore children to them. Now these, the Nephilim meaning, were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And so the issue that Genesis 6 presents is this weird fusion of divine and human in an improper way. It's these Nephilim warrior giants. Okay, so Genesis 6 begins the conflict of the giants. And there's actually a super famous story about a giant in this little dude named David's story, who's named what? What's like the most famous giant we could think of? Goliath. Okay, cool. So Goliath is an issue, but also remember Nimrod, who is kind of hidden in this genealogy. He's also a giant, and he's the sort of progenitor of these terrible, awful empires that we're going to meet later on. And so the giants are a massive issue, a massive problem. And then Genesis 11 presents another sort of thing, but we don't get what the issue is until we get to Deuteronomy. It's like Moses kind of adds a little bit of extra color to what actually happened there at Babel. So I'm going to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 32. All right, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 and 9. Okay, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind. What story is that? When he divided mankind? We just went over it?
Bible.
Okay, cool. So, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, that is, at the Tower of Babel, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. But Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob or Israel, his allotted heritage. Okay, so we had the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6, and now we have them mentioned again in Deuteronomy 32, involving something that's happening at the Tower of Babel. And so what's happening here is, think of it this way: when God is, he separates the people, each to their nations. They have their own language. What he does is he sets up like spiritual, not like kings, but like stewards of each nation. And that's splitting according to the sons of God. And that's the 70 thing. And so like in the book of Daniel, we see Daniel's really praying. He's praying really hard. But then Gabriel comes to him and says, hey man, sorry, I couldn't make it to you in time. I was in conflict with the prince of Persia. It's like, what? Who the heck what? And so it's this idea of that each of these nations, these rebel nations, have like a spiritual spirit being who's kind of like in charge of them. And the hope that God gives them, as we're going to see in Psalm 82 also, is that God gives them this charge to be like, hey, steward, take care of the nation that I've given you, and ultimately point them to me. And what God does is he takes Israel as his allotted heritage. And so all these other nations, they have these other sons of God in charge of them. They're not God, but they're these like these stewards. And then God sets himself over Israel. That's why they're his people. And so it's kind of like, so the president, so we have like whatever, senators, representatives. And so God would be like the president in this case, where the senators or the representatives would be like the sons of God. But in Israel's case, it's like if the president of the entire country represented one state. Like he's like, you guys get every state, but you know what? I get Hawaii, or something like that. And so the nations are spread about. There's these spiritual beings who are placed in charge of the other nations, but that's actually a massive problem, because in Psalm 82, we see that these sons of God, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. What they're doing is not what God has charged them to do. This is what they're doing instead. All right, Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? For goodness sake, give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. Now I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. But nonetheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. So arise, O God, this is the psalmist speaking, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. And so Genesis 11 sets up this issue where it's like a concession. It's an improper setup. It's not God's intention. Remember, God's intention is for, I know this is weird, guys. This would require like 47 classes in one, but just go with me. So what God intends for his created world is that humans and God, they rule together as partnership. The sun, moon, and stars, if you guys remember that, they have their own realm of rule. Humanity has its own realm of rule. But now what's happening is because of this Tower of Babel incident, it's like these people, they're saying, God, we don't want you. We don't want you. We don't care about you. And so God says, all right, you don't want me. That's fine. You're going to be allotted to these other sort of spiritual beings who are going to represent you to me. But if you don't want anything to do with me, that's fine. But that setup is supposed to draw the people to God ultimately, because God's whole plan is I want all the nations. And so what I'm going to do is allow these people to sort of represent, but to push these people toward me, to push them toward righteousness, away from wickedness and all that. But what happens is that these spiritual beings who are above these nations, they get kind of puffed up and they start to actually crave the worship themselves. And what this manifests as is wickedness and violence and all this stuff. And that's where we get all these weird, like the biblical authors are fully believing that there are other gods, and I say this, let me unpack that, not that are co-equal or co-eternal with God the Creator. There's only one Creator God, but there are other super powerful spiritual beings that one can give your allegiance to, and that these are real, and that they have real power, and you can give yourself to them, and they will actually affect you in powerful ways. And what's awful is that Genesis 11 is like these beings affecting nations at a national level. It's not necessarily like a personal level, like you're going to affect me. It's like whole communities, whole nations, all that's being drawn toward violence and wickedness and away from God. And so Genesis 11 starts this idea of the powers and the principalities. That's the language that Paul uses. So it's the powers over the nations, the powers of this dark world. And so in Ephesians, I know we're going all over the place, guys, but this is important stuff. All right. So in Ephesians chapter 1, Paul's just going nuts. He's like just tumbling over his words, just looking at how amazing God is and what he's done. And so in chapter 1, verse 15, he says, "For this reason, because I have heard your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love toward all the saints, I do not cease to give thanks for you, remembering you in my prayers, that the God of our Lord Jesus, the Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and of revelation in the knowledge of him, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance in his saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power toward us who believe, according to the working of his great might that he worked in Christ Jesus, when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he put all things under his feet, and gave him as head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all." And so what we see in the ministry of Jesus is that he attacks each of these problems. And that's super important, that there's these three issues that are going on. And what Jesus does when he walks to the scene, he solves each and every single one of these problems. And so the first one, for instance, the serpent, after Genesis 3, doesn't really make an appearance. It's like, that doesn't mean it's not around, but it's just not it's not an appearance. It's like the spirit of like the chaos. It manifests in all these different ways, but we don't really see the spirit, like the serpent, in actuality. But when we get to Matthew, for instance, when Jesus is in the wilderness and he's having his testing, it says the tempter comes up to him, the Hasatan, the Diabolos. And it's all of these temptations like, man, if you're really the Son of God, why is your Father leading you out into the wilderness to starve? If you're the Son of God, man, like, would he really do that to you? No. So just make yourself some bread. Reveal yourself. And Jesus is like, nope, I'm not going to I don't live on bread alone, but by every word that the Lord says. And then he says, man, you know what? If your Father really cared about you, I bet if you just threw yourself off the roof of this building, he'd save you. So just force God's hand. Like, force him to save you. And Jesus is like, nope, not going to do that. And then he says, you know what? You know what would be awesome? I'll give you all the nations of the earth, because really they're mine. If you just bow down to me, I'll give you all the nations. And Jesus is just like, nope, get out of here. I'm not going to do that. Away from me, Satan. And so Jesus, he has his encounter in the wilderness with this serpent. And he wins a victory. He does what no human up to the story has been able to do. He stares the serpent in the face, and he has authority and rule over it. But remember, the whole story of the gospel, Genesis 3:15, is a human will come to crush the head of the serpent, but also be crushed at the same time. And so Jesus' ultimate victory over the serpent was his death and his resurrection. Because remember, the serpent is this like embodiment. He like absorbs, he becomes the figurehead, the fountainhead of what chaos and death is. He channels it so much so that he becomes it effectively. And so when Jesus dies, it's like a victory for the serpent. I don't know if you guys have seen the Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. When they slay Aslan, all of those creatures, they're celebrating this like death that they think they have won. And that's C.S. Lewis's depiction of what's happening at the cross, at least on the day of the crucifixion. It's like, man, what? Like evil has won? No. And so on the third day, which we're about to celebrate next week, it's that Jesus' resurrection is a display that death has been defeated. And so the serpent has been defeated. The very thing that this thing draws its power from, death, it's been ultimately and utterly crushed and destroyed. And so Jesus comes to solve the issue of the serpent. He also comes to solve the issue of the giants, weirdly enough. And this is, again, it gets a little bit odd. So in the Old Testament, the giants are, it's this improper fusion of divine and human. And we actually see a lot of the biblical stories, like the great heroes of the story, tackle the giants. And so Joshua, when they go into the land of Canaan, they go after these giant clans to eradicate them, to destroy them. We see David and his mighty men finally put an end to the giants. But then they're still there, because in the Hebrew imagination, the disembodied spirits of these creatures are what demons become. And so when Jesus crosses the sea and he comes to that guy And he's like, who are you, son of, like, have you come to destroy us? And he says, yeah, what's your name? What's the name that collection of demons gives Jesus? You guys remember? That's kind of a weird question.
Legion.
What is it?
Legion.
Yeah, legion. It's a military term. It's a military term. And so this collection, it thinks of itself as this collection of warrior-like things. And so remember, the Gibborim, the Nephilim, they're these mighty warriors. And so they're also called unclean spirits, and you become unclean with contact with a dead body. And so there's this whole theology of demons are these disembodied spirits from these warrior giants who they can't go anywhere. And so they're craving, like, whatever, craving a body, craving to just, like, be taken care of. They also ultimately crave chaos, because when they're like, Jesus, don't kill us, please send us off into the herd of pigs, the unclean spirit goes into the unclean animal, and then it just causes the animal to just go in the sea. And it's like, what the heck? You're so prone toward death that you go into this herd of pigs and you just make them kill themselves. And so Jesus comes ultimately to destroy the giants, the spiritual giants in terms of demons. And so we have those, all these stories of Jesus just being super, like, he just has power over them. And so, like, he casts out demons like that. Like, they pose no threat. They pose no threat to him because they're ultimately defeated. And so when he goes to that guy named Legion, or he goes to the dude, this demon, this Legion, because we are many, he casts them out like that. There's no struggle, there's no fight. And so Jesus is shown as like the ultimate David figure. David had his victory against his giant, Goliath, but Jesus has victory over the spiritual forces and powers behind the giants. And then also at his crucifixion and resurrection, this is Jesus' display of his power over the powers, because the whole crucifixion thing is like Jesus, his way, versus the way of Rome. And so Jesus is saying, you guys think this is the way to rule the world, where might makes right, where oppression is the way to go, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, but that's not how you rule the world. You rule the world by dying for the world. And so his crucifixion and resurrection is another victory against the powers. And what Paul says is, hey man, you, Jesus, has been highly exalted above all those powers and principalities. Because remember, God gives them legitimate authority over people, which is not ideal. But then this human, this Jesus, is given authority over them. It's like putting them back in their place. It's like a reminder of, hey guys, this is not actually ideal. This was temporary. You let this power get to your head, but I have power here. I'm the victorious one. And amazingly, what Paul says is that we are seated in Christ with him on that same throne. And so now we have victory and power over the powers of principalities. And so we don't have to kind of bend to the way of oppression where might makes right, where all this stuff. Like, we can look at the national issues that we see and that we face and detach them from the peoples themselves. Like we talk about, love the sinner, hate the sin. We can detach and say, is this a power problem? And if it is a power problem, then what can we do to actually reject that and to call it to account, because they have been ultimately and utterly defeated. And so Genesis 1 through 11 sets this hope, which we just talked about. Obviously, we know Jesus is the one to fulfill it. But the whole rest of the story, we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much wrong. Who the heck's going to solve this? This is such a bad problem. We have the serpent who's going to be going around affecting people. We have these giants who represent everything that's gone wrong with the cosmic structure and the cosmic order. And we have this improper, weird power setup where humans are now being ruled over by spiritual beings rather than partnering with God to rule the world. It's this weird, awful, odd accommodation. And it's like, my gosh, this is just not right. This is not how God, this is the farthest thing from Genesis 1. It's the farthest thing from Genesis 1. But we're at this point now where God is going to look at this problem and he's going to say, all right, you know what? I'm going to set apart, or I'm going to go to actually solve this issue. And Genesis 12 is when the story of redemption begins. Because Genesis 12 is when he selects this one guy, Abram, and he says, Abram, go to the land I'm going to show you. Trust me. I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. And through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so God's going to choose one family line. He's going to choose one dude. Because remember, the whole thing is that there's going to be one human, Genesis 3:15. There has to be one snake crusher. So God's going to start using one family line to get to that point, but with the sole intention of then blessing all the nations of the earth. And that's God's ultimate intention and ultimate plan. One more thing of note, just real quick. Genesis 11 is reversed in Acts 2. And so remember, in Acts 2, the Holy Spirit rushes upon the apostles, and then what do they start to do? They start to talk in other languages. So they start to talk in other languages. So it's like a reversal where the other languages are actually what unifies the people. And so they start talking to all these ethnic Jews who are not necessarily from the land of Judah, but they come from all the other lands. They're talking in their own languages to unify them back together into the body of the Messiah. And so Acts 2 acts as a reversal of Genesis 11 itself. And so God is calling for a different kind of unity. Remember, unity is not the issue. It's the motive behind unity is the problem. It's unity for our own sake, for our own name, for our own arrogance, rather than to uphold and uplift the name of Jesus. So there you go. That's Genesis 1 through 11. So as we move forward, we need to bear in mind that we're going to see these issues pop up, and we have to remember that it all started here. So Genesis 1 through 11, again, it sets the tone. Genesis 1 is the picture of what God intends. It's like the ideal starting point. Genesis 2 is, okay, are we going to get to that starting point? Genesis 3 is, nope, we don't get to that starting point at all. Genesis 4 and 5 is like, whoa, we are really off the track. And then 6 through 11, it's the same thing of just like we're furthering and furthering away from the ideal, but God is going to steer the boat back because that's his ultimate plan. And he has ultimate power. And he's going to use a broken humanity to do so. And so there's going to be moments where we're like, whoa, what the heck is going on? How is God going to use this? But he ultimately will. So there you go. Hey guys, all right, this is going to be kind of a postscript to this episode. There were two lines of thought that I presented in this episode that I did close, but I had already hit the kind of record button. So the people that were in the class got to hear this, but I never actually recorded it. So this is going to kind of act as a closing the loop on two things that I presented. The first of those things that I want to talk about is just Paul's missionary journey and how that sort of ties into the Table of Nations. So Paul is super determined and convinced that he is going to make it to Spain. He is like, I'm doing it, I'm going. And what that seems to be is that's kind of the location of Tarshish. And so it's like Paul is he's the apostle to the Gentiles, the apostle to the nations. And so he is so determined that the gospel will reach the outer reaches of the nations. And so it's kind of all based on that Table of Nations. And it seems like Spain is like his final frontier, his final thing. And so that's pretty cool. He's like super determined that, man, all the nations need to hear this, because that's the story, or that's the promise that God made to Abraham, that in him all the nations will be blessed. And so Paul sees it as his mission to preach the gospel to all the nations that they knew about in the time. And it's our continued mission to do the same today. The second thing was when we talked about the Tower of Babel, how it presented a problem with the spiritual powers and the principalities that God placed over these nations. So I mentioned Deuteronomy 32, and that's kind of that's like a really good passage to go to. But there's a parallel passage in Deuteronomy 4 that I should have mentioned also. And so Deuteronomy 4, starting in verse 15, it reads this way, and this is from the Lexham English Bible, the LEB. All right, so Moses says, "So you must be very careful for yourselves, because you did not see any form on the day Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb," that's Sinai, "from the midst of the fire, so that you do not ruin yourselves and make for yourselves a divine image in the form of any image, a replica of male or female, a replica of any animal that is upon the earth, a replica of any winged bird that flies in the air, a replica of any creeping thing on the ground, a replica of any fish that is in the water below the earth." Okay, so here's the verse, 4:19. "And do this so that you do not lift your eyes toward heaven or toward the skies and observe the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of the heaven, and be led astray and bow down to them and serve them, things that Yahweh your God has allotted to all the peoples under the skies. But Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the furnace of iron from Egypt to be a people of inheritance to him, as it is this day." Okay, so that language of the sun, the moon, and the stars, the host of heaven, that's Genesis 1 language, and that's specifically day 4, where God gives the authority to sort of shine his own divine light to the sun, the moon, and the stars to be symbols which are tasked with just shining his light into the darkness. And so what Moses is saying is that the spiritual beings that these things in the sky that they're observing point to are the very things that God has allotted to the other nations. And so it's just another thing that is like another, not necessarily a proof text, but just sort of a deeper theology behind these rebellious spiritual powers that are over the nations, that God gave a task to uphold justice and to point people toward greater righteousness, and greater righteousness as defined by God. But these spiritual beings started to crave that power for themselves. And so that verse and that passage, together with Deuteronomy 32, kind of form the backbone of the theology of like the Elohim, the spiritual powers, the gods, lowercase g, that are over the other nations. And so again, Jesus is shown to be ultimately more powerful than them, because he's the true human, the human that we see in Daniel 7 sitting on the throne with God, over the rebellious Elohim, the rebellious gods. And again, it's so amazing because Paul says, you know what, guys, we are sat with Jesus right now in that throne. And so we don't have to be beholden to the powers and the principalities, because we also share in the victory and the true humanness, and we are made truly and fully human in the Messiah. And I just think that's super awesome. So I just wanted to close the loop on those two things. So this is going to be the end of the postscript. And so just combine this with the rest of the episode. All right, guys, thank you so much. Have a good one. May God bless you. All right, guys, that's it for this week. I just want to thank you for listening in, and I just want to say a blessing over you. So may God bless you as you go to wherever you're going next, home, to work, whatever. I just pray that you would feel and experience God's presence. All right, thank you guys so much.